The girl was hunted by the villagers just because she awakened as a starless tamer. Even her loving parents were no exception, and they wanted to kill her themselves. It wasn't until she met a slime that her journey of revenge began. Just recently, the 8-year-old protagonist was evading the villagers' pursuit. In a world where skills reigned supreme, her lack of skills symbolized misfortune, prompting the village chief to want her dead. She fled to a place where she had hidden for 3 years, packing everything she could into a poor-quality magic bag, including books and some low-quality potions from a tree hollow. It's worth noting that the protagonist has memories of her past life, which often communicates with her. The next day, she discovered a pile of trash. After rummaging through it, she found a piece of clothing, a map, and some low-quality potions. After packing these items, she couldn't help but lament that an unwanted child could only scavenge. Just then, her pursuers found the location. She quickly hid before they noticed her. Hearing them come to kill her made her tremble with fear until they left. Exhausted, she then ran into the forest and fell asleep on the ground. The next day, while passing through a swamp, she was attacked by a group of slimes. She treated her wounds with the potions, but due to their poor quality, it took 2 bottles to heal. Standing up, she was struck by the beauty of the surroundings. She took off her outer clothes and jumped into the water. As she floated to the surface, she felt truly relaxed for the first time. To avoid a life of hiding, she cut her hair with a dagger, deciding to disguise herself as a boy to avoid danger. She then searched her magic bag for clothes and quickly changed into men's clothing. Since she was changing her appearance, she decided to change her name as well. Her past life consciousness suggested the name Ella, named after a plant that survives strong adversity. While on the road, she unexpectedly found a blue light floating in the bushes. Upon closer inspection, it was a tiny slime, which she found adorable. She learned from a book that it was a rare, fragile slime, also vulnerable like her. A slight breeze could blow it away, which it did, leaving the slime unable to right itself. She gently flipped it over, relieved to see it spirited. However, she could not have anticipated that this type of slime only had a lifespan of 1 day. Just then, a strong wind swept the slime away. She immediately chased after it and leapt to catch it before it fell into the river. After rescuing the slime, she made a decision. At night, the girl couldn't help but confide in the slime. Her parents had adored her, but when she awakened her starless taming skill at 5, they despised her. They even took away her place to eat and sleep. The only kindness she received was from the village fortune teller, who taught her many things, including how to use the magic bag she was given. Sadly, the fortune teller had recently passed away, leaving her once again alone. She couldn't understand why being starless meant deserving such treatment, to the point where everyone wanted her dead. With these thoughts, she drifted into a restless sleep. As dawn broke, the girl woke to find the slime gone, which deeply saddened her. She thought she had grown accustomed to loneliness, but the disappearance of the slime brought tears to her eyes. Fighting back her sorrow, she packed her belongings, planning to follow the fortune teller's advice to head to the royal capital. But when she took out the map, she realized the slime hadn't disappeared after all, much to her joy. Deciding to form a contract with the slime, she followed the steps from a book. She shared a bit of her magic with the creature, and as it glowed, she named it Alan, after the color of the sky. With the successful naming, a mark appeared on Alan's forehead. "Alan, I look forward to our journey together," she said. Then, using traps, she caught several wild mice. She apologized to them before using a knife to skin and debone them. She wrapped the prepared meat in banana leaves. After packing the meat, she checked the map, which, being of poor quality, did not show the location of the royal capital. Since the map did not include it, she decided to head to a town on the edge of the map instead. Suddenly, a gust of wind threatened to sweep Alan away, but the girl quickly protected him. Realizing Alan was still very weak, she wondered if he could ever become stronger. At that moment, it seemed something was approaching from behind. Frightened, she quickly tucked Alan away and ran in the opposite direction, her cheek getting scratched by branches. Realizing she was about to be caught, she decided to climb a tree to hide. Just as she stabilized herself, a swarm of giant ants passed by. She had to stay silent and still until the ants left. Once it was safe, she let Alan out, remaining vigilant. Seeing no immediate danger, she took out a blue potion to heal the cuts on her face. Due to the potion's low quality, it took 3 bottles to heal the wounds adequately. Alan seemed thoughtful with an empty medicine bottle in hand. Later, as the girl hurried along her way, she discovered a wanted poster with her name on it, which initially frightened her. However, she quickly realized they were looking for someone named Lily, not her, Ella. So she tore up the wanted poster, only to find another one depicting her as a grotesque figure. Angrily, she shredded this poster into pieces too. Before nightfall, she reached a town. Her long time wandering had made her a bit shy. Observing people with various life skills filled her with envy. Passing by a butcher's shop, she suddenly remembered that wild mouse meat might be sellable. However, her extensive time roaming had left her unsure how to initiate a sale. She lingered outside the shop until the owner called out to her. She then mentioned she had something to sell, but before she could present it, the owner, who had a 2-star sense of smell, detected it was wild mouse meat. Noting its freshness, he offered to buy as much as she had. She sold most of her stock for $100, and the owner told her she could bring more whenever she had it, which made her very happy. Afterward, she went to a bakery and bought 2 loaves of bread for $20. Then, she went outside, excitedly showing the bread to Alan. She split 1 loaf in half, sharing it with Alan, and eagerly ate her portion. However, she noticed Alan seemed uninterested in the bread, leaving her puzzled about what he might want to eat. The next day, she continued her routine of catching wild mice, planning to sell them for more bread. While walking, she stumbled upon a junkyard. After some rummaging, she found a pile of low-quality potions, perfect for replenishing her stock. While sorting the potions, Alan lunged at a pile of blue potions and quickly consumed them. Initially thinking Alan could decompose trash, she tried offering him some, but he ignored it. It wasn't until she switched to red potions, which he merely glanced at, and then to blue ones, that Alan excitedly decomposed them. She converted today's catch of wild mice into money and went to purchase bread. The bakery owner, finding her cute, even gave her an extra loaf, for which she was very grateful. Although she had been wandering, she still made sure to bathe daily. She wanted to bathe Alan too, but he seemed to fear being washed away. After bathing, she fed several blue potions to Alan and enjoyed some bread herself. These days brought her a happiness she had never known before. Life was beautiful in theory, but harsh in reality. As usual, she went to town the next day, only to encounter the 2 adventurers who had previously chased her. Though they didn't recognize her, she didn't dare stay long. Passing by the butcher's shop, the owner asked if she had caught any wild mice. Just as she was about to reply, she saw a wanted poster next to the shop, which scared her into making an excuse to leave, leaving the owner puzzled. She then planned to buy some bread to fill her stomach, and the owner's wife even intended to give her extra loaves. Just then, the girl noticed that the bakery also had a wanted poster. She stepped back and ran away without grabbing the bread. She climbed a tree and began to cry. This place seemed so nice, but it appeared she could no longer stay. She opened her magic bag and poured her heart out to Alan, staying there all night. The next day she left the town but hadn't gone far when her stomach began to protest. She regretted not taking the bread earlier. In her haste, she hadn't prepared water or collected more potions, which made Alan gloomy. After walking for a long time, she finally heard the sound of running water. Following the sound, she quickly found the water source and a fruit tree nearby. Alan's reaction was intense, and the next second, she realized the tree was a man-eating magic tree. Frozen in shock, she was almost attacked when Alan pushed her away just in time, allowing her to grab him and run. As her consciousness faded and running became difficult, she realized she was injured. She wanted to use a blue potion to heal, but remembered she had used them all up. Just when she felt desperate, Alan seemed to awaken an unknown ability. Her consciousness appeared to travel back years to when she was a cute, under 5-year-old girl. Her father, who adored her, would magically create water to help her when she choked on bread and tenderly helped her drink it. Back home, her mother and sister had prepared dinner. The family enjoyed the meal and discussed their skills. Her father's 2-star woodworking, her mother's 2-star tailoring, her sister's 1-star healing, and her brother's 3-star furniture making. With her awakening day tomorrow, her mother wondered what skill she would want. She expressed a desire for a taming skill to befriend magical creatures, which made everyone laugh. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. It was a fortune teller who had come to bless her. She had known about the girl's past life memories since their first meeting and advised her not to tell anyone, which the naive girl readily agreed to. After the blessing, her sister was curious about what skill she would awaken. The fortune teller, with only a 1-star prediction skill, couldn't foresee it accurately. The next morning, accompanied by her parents, she went to church. After the priest's introduction, she lightly touched the holy water, and soon, under the priest's mysterious operation, the water orb showed she had awakened as a demon tamer with the ability to tame magical creatures. While she and her parents were happy, the orb suddenly exploded, and the priest announced she had awakened as a 0-star demon tamer. Her parents were instantly distressed, as 0-star was seen as forsaken by the gods. Back home, her father was visibly upset, unable to accept that his daughter was 0-star. As she tried to comfort him, her father angrily told her to shut up and stomped on a wooden carving he had given her. Her mother cried, and her brother grabbed her arm and threw her to the ground, while her sister just glanced and walked upstairs. Hearing her brother tell her to leave, she sadly left the house. The news of her 0-star status had spread throughout the village. Staying there meant being chased by children with stones and receiving disgusted looks from villagers she once knew. She could only run into the forest until she fell, realizing she was now homeless. As the rain fell, she could only wander aimlessly in the downpour. Hungry, she had no choice but to eat unripe fruits. Even when she found shelter from the rain, her soaked body remained bitterly cold. Later, the girl gathered some branches, hoping to use magic to light them for warmth. However, her magic was too weak to ignite the branches. On her second attempt to light the fire, she fainted from magic exhaustion. When she woke up, she found someone cooking by a fire. To her surprise, it was the fortune teller. The fortune teller noticed that the girl's magic was weaker than most and cautioned her to be careful using it, as it could endanger her life. After sharing this advice, she handed the girl a bowl of hot soup. After the meal, the fortune teller reassured her that even as a 0-star, knowledge could still enable her to live well. Seeing the girl's forlorn expression, the fortune teller gave her a magic bag and some books. Although the bag was of inferior quality, it could hold a lot, and the books contained valuable knowledge for her journey. In the following days, the girl stayed with the fortune teller and learned various survival skills. 3 years later, she was adept at scavenging useful items from garbage dumps and using her knowledge to set traps for rats. One day, while cooking by the river, she wondered why the fortune teller hadn't visited her recently. Just then, she sensed someone approaching, quickly extinguished the fire, and hid in the bushes. She saw 2 villagers, which gave her an ominous feeling. That evening, she secretly entered the church and overheard 2 women talking about the fortune teller's death from a cold. Before she could grieve, she heard her father and the village chief talking. The chief believed she would bring misfortune to the village and wanted her to disappear from the world. Her father agreed without hesitation. The chief then blamed the fortune teller's death on the girl because he had ignored warnings and continued to care for her. He ordered everyone to chase her down. That night, villagers armed with torches searched for her in the fields. As the girl opened her eyes, she realized it was all a nightmare. She also remembered she was severely injured and resigned herself to being eaten by Alan. The next day, Alan woke her up by hopping around in the parking lot, and she discovered her injuries had healed. It turned out that Alan had been healing her, not intending to eat her. Before she could recover from her shock, Alan started making puffing noises as if trying to speak, which excited her greatly. She thanked Alan profusely. Unexpectedly, by providing a clue about a high-level magical creature, she had earned a silver and 2 gold coins, an immense fortune for someone who usually measured value by the worth of rats. The next morning, Alan woke her like an alarm clock with his puffing noises. She had to pet him before he would get up. Their breakfast consisted of wild fruits and a blue potion. After consuming a bottle of the potion, Alan not only grew larger, but could also jump on the spot, showing no signs of his previous frailty. After the last potion was consumed, Alan seemed still hungry. Fortunately, the girl soon found a dump site. While she was happy to find new clothes, Alan urged her to look for more potions. They quickly found a box of discarded potions, and Alan was not picky. Even expired blue potions were acceptable to him. At that moment, the protagonist noticed Alan had swallowed a bottle of red potion. She then tried to give him other potions, but Alan made a face of disdain. It seemed Alan only favored red and blue potions. After having his fill, Alan looked happy. The protagonist noticed many wild fruits ahead. While tasting some herself, she picked one for Alan, who again showed disinterest. Deciding to ignore his reaction, she started putting all the wild fruits into her magic bag. Soon, it was time for dinner. As she ate, she wished the road was covered with wild fruits. After finishing the potions, Alan still seemed hungry. Reluctantly, the protagonist took out 3 more bottles for him to absorb. Later, she climbed a tree with Alan and began telling him stories from her childhood. She was awakened by Alan's alarm-like sounds, only to find it was already the next morning. She realized she had fallen asleep mid-story, and Alan had consumed all the potions in the bag. The protagonist then prepared to hunt rats for money. Upon triggering a trap, she excitedly went to check but found a magical snake instead of a rat. Overwhelmed at first, she thought of selling the snake for money. She pulled out a sack from her bag, secured it, and sighed in relief. On her way, she suddenly smelled something odd and followed the scent, only to be shocked by the sight of an attacked carriage and several bodies bitten by magical creatures. Seeing the gruesome scene, she quickly fled, fearing the creatures might discover her. She ran for 2.5 minutes before stopping, breathless, in front of Ratum village. Upon entering the village, she immediately went to the village hall. The casual atmosphere changed to seriousness when she mentioned the bodies outside the village. After recounting her experience, a tall adventurer stepped forward and asked if it might be bandits. The protagonist was sure it was a magical creature. Noting the severe damage to the bodies and the horses, which bandits would likely have stolen instead of killing, the adventurer believed her and instructed everyone to search for traces of the magical creature, telling her they would pay for the information after confirmation. This left the protagonist confused. After an explanation from another villager, she learned that she could receive a fee for reporting magical creatures or related deaths to the local authorities. She was given a certificate to claim her fee after the investigation. After thanking them, she went to sell the magical snake at a pharmacy, where she received 3 silver coins, equivalent to the price of 30 rats, enough to buy dried meat. Next, she planned to find food for Alan but was distracted by the numerous magic bags at the dump site. While she sorted through them, Alan began feasting on his own. Initially planning to take all the bags, she realized not all could be stacked. After some calculations, she managed to reduce over 20 magic bags into 4, using a nesting method. It was only then that she remembered to pick up potions, unaware that Alan was already full. The protagonist returned to the street and found it crowded with adventurers. She quickly put on her hood. At that moment, the adventurer from before spotted her. They had confirmed that the creatures that attacked the carriage were ogres and an ogre king. They also had located the creature's hideout. He urged her not to leave the village and reminded her to collect the information fee. She then went to the village hall. When the lady at the desk asked for proof, the protagonist realized she had forgotten where she put it. As she searched through her magic bags, the lady's expression changed from a smile to surprise, and then back to normal when the protagonist finally found the certificate. The lady then handed her a silver plate worth 5 silver coins and 2 gold coins. Having never seen so much money, the protagonist began calculating how many rats the money was worth, until the lady reminded her to pay attention. She carefully put the money in her bag. As she was about to leave, the lady called out, "You forgot something." That evening, while the adventurers prepared for the next day's expedition with a feast of roast meat and wine, the protagonist sat in a corner eating the wild fruits she had picked during the day and feeding potions to Alan. Although she had to stay in the village until the creatures were dealt with, it didn't stop her from dreaming about her future adventures. Alan, not expecting that he had just acquired a new bottle of blue potion, eyed it eagerly. Seeing the protagonist unwilling to give up the potion, Alan began to act cute and playful. Recently, the traps she had set were being destroyed one by one. While she was still wondering what was breaking them, Alan seemed to sense something and suddenly ran into the forest. The protagonist followed a faint scent and discovered a dying Hakimi in the bushes. According to the books, it resembled a fierce, rare creature called Adam Dara. Seeing its desperate eyes, she felt an inexplicable sympathy, knowing what it felt like to be dying. She decided to stay and keep it company in its final moments. Suddenly, Alan leaped up, his body swelling massively, and enveloped the dying Hakimi. His body was covered in foam, and as his injuries healed, Alan returned to his harmless appearance. Hakimi then approached the protagonist, and just as she thought she would be attacked, it nuzzled against her instead. Thus, she gained a few new companions. Although their magic was too weak to form a contract, she named it Amy, a name that meant sky in her previous life. As the protagonist neared the next village, she put Alan back into the magic bag and pondered how to settle Amy. Understanding her concerns, Amy quickly darted into the bushes and disappeared. When she arrived at the La Tome village inn, the red-haired gatekeeper's fierce appearance made her hesitant to approach. Just then, a man tried to enter the inn but was caught by the red-haired gatekeeper carrying a large amount of bootleg liquor. He was roughly handed over to a man wearing glasses. The protagonist watched all this and was about to reconsider entering when she realized she had caught the red-haired gatekeeper's attention. Reluctantly, she walked forward. As she passed by, the gatekeeper stopped her and asked where she was from. Just as she was about to answer, his fierce gaze made her tremble. Upon learning she was from Latomi village, his expression softened to one of pity. He knelt down to comfort the protagonist after hearing that something had happened in Latomi village. 2.5 minutes later, she successfully entered the village. Upon arrival, the protagonist immediately went to the butcher shop. The butcher's wife, learning that the protagonist wanted to catch rats to sell, warned her about wild boars in the forest and advised her to be careful. The protagonist thanked her, bought some jerky, and decided against spending the night in the forest after hearing about the wild boars. She then went to the Adventurers' Square, a camping area for adventurers. Seeing her alone, the blonde manager pointed her to a relatively safe spot and handed her a wooden tag, a permit to enter and exit the square. Following his directions, she arrived at a clearing, laid out a cloth, and made it her resting place. Surrounded by large and small tents, she wished she had one too, to avoid worrying about the weather and to keep Alan out of the magic bag. Remembering the information fee she had, the protagonist decided to buy a second-hand tent. While browsing, she turned and came face to face with a man with red hair, startling her nearly to tears. A man with glasses commented on the red-haired man's carelessness. After learning that the protagonist wanted to buy a tent, the red-haired man introduced himself as Jones and the man with glasses as Jack. Following them to a shop, the shop owner, after learning she was from Latomi village and wanted to buy a tent, recommended some lightweight options and inquired about her budget. The protagonist, unfamiliar with tent prices, mentioned her budget was 1 silver plate. Shocking everyone, Jack remarked on the danger she must have faced to earn that fee. The shop owner then brought out a tent that was 90% new and very light. Seeing her interest, he sold it to her at the original purchase price of 1 silver coin. She paid the shop owner, who then allowed her to mark it with her own symbol, making the tent officially hers. She wrote down Alan's name, and the shop owner gave her a gift item. After saying goodbye to Jones, she returned to the square to set up her tent. With the last support pole erected, her tent was ready. As soon as she entered the tent, she took out a sleeping Alan. When Alan woke up and learned it was their tent, he was ecstatic. To celebrate their new home, the protagonist planned to collect some potions from the garbage dump. As she stepped out of the tent, she noticed 4 people nearby with malicious grins approaching her. They accused her of stealing their tent. Despite her explanations, they did not believe she could afford such a tent and even wanted to confiscate her 4 magic bags as stolen goods. Alan bristled in response. Just as she thought of escaping and was grabbed by one of them, the blonde manager came over. After learning what had happened, he grabbed the person's hand and rescued the protagonist, stating the tent was hers and that he had accompanied her to buy it with the squad leader and deputy leader. The accusers were silenced by his words. Seeing they were about to be captured, they tried to flee but were quickly surrounded by the self-defense force, ending the ordeal with their capture. To compensate the protagonist, the blonde manager gave her a new blue potion. She thanked him, which made him a bit embarrassed, and he soon left to interrogate the culprits. At night, the protagonist prepared a large amount of potions for Alan to celebrate their new home. Unexpectedly, Alan kept staring at the magic bag. The protagonist quickly realized his intention and tried to dissuade him. The next morning, the protagonist got up and planned to go hunting. As soon as she stepped out of the square, she was greeted by members of the self-defense team. She instinctively saluted in return, but as more people greeted her, she began to feel uneasy. 2.5 hours later, her traps were destroyed by wild boars. Just when she was frustrated about not catching any prey, Amy appeared behind her with a prey in its mouth. Amy placed the prey at the protagonist's feet, signaling her to take it. The protagonist happily embraced Amy and began to pet her. While the protagonist was dissecting the prey, Amy played with Alan. By the time she finished, both had played themselves to sleep. The protagonist woke Alan, and Amy took the moment to nuzzle her head against the protagonist before jumping into the jungle and leaving. On the way back, the protagonist couldn't help but praise Alan for his energy. The next second, Alan tripped over a branch, dizzy from the fall. The protagonist then went to the butcher shop. Due to the freshness and lack of a gamey smell of the meat, she sold it for 855 copper coins and received the butcher's wife's approval. After saying goodbye to the butcher's wife, the protagonist encountered the morning's guard team again and was greeted once more, which completely confused her. She didn't understand why everyone knew her. Just then, Jack happened to pass by. After learning what had happened, he explained that it was all under Jones's instructions. He had not only informed the team about the protagonist, but also asked everyone to take extra care of her. The protagonist was a bit overwhelmed by the attention. After saying goodbye to Jack, the protagonist was grateful for their kindness, though she did not want to attract attention. However, the feeling of being cared for was not too bad. At that moment, the protagonist discovered a stall selling jaluo, a specialty from her hometown. The stall owner explained that the harvest in Latomi village was poor this year, and it was difficult for him to get the supplies. Upon learning that the protagonist had escaped from Latomi village, the stall owner angrily cursed the village chief for being a scoundrel. He explained that the jaluo were protected by the soothsayer tree, who alone knew the right time to harvest them. However, due to Tree's illness, the scoundrel village chief refused to give her medicine, leading to her death. The village chief then blamed an 8-year-old child for the mishap. Since Tree's death, the jaluo could not be harvested successfully, leading to a severe financial crisis in the village. To save himself, the scoundrel village chief drove some villagers out. Seeing the protagonist's low spirits, the stall owner handed her a jaluo, hoping it would cheer her up. Back at the tent, the protagonist worried about her family's situation. But remembering that they had abandoned her, she let go of her concerns. Now, with the company of Alan and Amy and the support of the guard team, she was happy to have a small home of her own. Another day has passed. Like usual, the protagonist got up in the morning. However, today was different because she happily responded to the care shown by the guard team. For today's hunt, she placed her traps in spots where wild boars couldn't reach them. As she was about to go to the dump to pick up potions, she encountered 2 adventurers who had previously escaped. One of the men demanded that she hand over a rare slime, but she immediately refused. When they tried to attack her, she turned and ran. As they caught up, she quickly changed direction and used the traps to outsmart the man. The man, embarrassed and angered, was about to grab the protagonist when Amy, her companion, appeared, causing them to release her. Amy didn't plan to let them go and roared, scaring them. With one leap, Amy knocked them down. 2.5 minutes later, Amy dropped the men in front of the protagonist. Sensing someone approaching, Amy disappeared into the jungle before the protagonist could warn her. The arrivals were Jones and Jack, who first made sure the protagonist wasn't hurt, then noticed the unconscious men on the ground. Back in the village, the protagonist learned that all 4 adventurers were wanted criminals, including 2 murderers. Thanks to her assistance, she would receive a reward of 2 gold and 3 silver coins, which almost overwhelmed her. Jones suggested that she open an account at the commercial guild to keep her money safe. At the guild, after providing a drop of blood, her basic information was recorded by a crystal ball. She then entered a small room where she could deposit her money. With an identity plaque, she could access her funds at any guild in the villages, similar to a bank book from her previous life. While Jones was out, Jack had spent the entire day looking for him, which he expressed with a hint of resentment. Later, at a kebab stand, Jones ordered 10 skewers of wild boar meat for each of them. Despite her protest that it was too much, Jones encouraged her to eat freely. The skewers, cooked by a lady with 4-star cooking skills, were delicious. During the meal, Jones asked about the protagonist's skills. She revealed she was a monster tamer, which they thought was impressive. However, when asked about her star level, she hesitated, noticing their change in demeanor. Jones then reassured her, emphasizing that character is more important than star level, as demonstrated by today's criminals. The next day, the protagonist planned to leave, as she had promised a fortune teller to visit a town near the capital. Jones and Jack were sad to see her go, but told her she could use their names if she encountered trouble. She was grateful for their support. Before parting, Jones expressed hope that she would return someday. After the protagonist left, Jack informed Jones that she was not on Latomi Village's escape list. Almost all villagers had left in groups. The only individual who had escaped alone was an 8-year-old girl. This suggested that the protagonist had secrets beyond her gender, perhaps explaining why she couldn't stay in the village. Unbeknownst to the protagonist, something terrifying in the forest ahead had set its sights on her. Although she escaped the forest safely, she soon encountered a horrifying ogre. Amy, to protect the protagonist, attacked the ogre and, seizing the right moment, bit it. The ogre screamed in pain but dragged Amy down a cliff with it. At that moment, 4 more ogres attacked the protagonist. Fortunately, she sensed their approach and dodged their assault. Running away, she noticed scarecrows tied to the trees ahead, a bizarre and unsettling scene. The pursuing ogre gave her no time to think, so she ran forward but stepped on a trap and got caught in a net. Seeing this, the ogre leaped to take her life. Just then, a dazzling fireball struck the ogre, followed by a red-haired man arriving on the scene. His fire tornado transformed into a giant firework in the sky. The man was pleased with the sight but quickly noticed the protagonist trapped in the ropes amid the flames. He shot the ropes with an arrow, causing her to fall quickly. She braced for pain but felt none as the red-haired man caught her. However, the disturbance attracted more ogres. The man had to carry the protagonist and jump aside, landing on 2 slimes released by a woman nearby. Their conversation revealed their names. The man was Eric and the woman, Maul. They belonged to the Flame Sword Eradication Team, sent to eliminate the rampant ogres and monsters in the area. The trap that caught the protagonist was meant for ogres. For safety, the team decided to take the protagonist to the nearest campsite. On the way, Sepher, curious, asked why she was alone in the mountains. She openly shared that she had left Latomi Village alone, heading for Oattown. The captain mentioned that the area was unsafe, and, since they were also from Oattown, she could accompany them. Soon, they reached the campsite, where teams of adventurers from various places had gathered, explaining the site's size. While others left for a while, only Eric stayed to prepare dinner. He was unhappy, visibly struggling with cooking. Although he always tried his best, complaints about his cooking being unpalatable or fishy had discouraged him. Nevertheless, a lavish dinner was soon served, and everyone teared up with joy at the first bite. The protagonist, unfamiliar with such reactions, cautiously asked about their thoughts. To her surprise, everyone was very satisfied. Eric even became an enthusiastic eater, praising her cooking skills. In his excitement, Eric used fire magic to launch a firework. This sparked an idea in the protagonist. Using flame color reactions might create even more impressive fireworks. The protagonist received some different colored medals from Maul. After a simple setup, she continued her interaction with the group. She learned that Maul was also a beast tamer, which made her feel positively towards Maul. Maul's 2 slimes were capable of digesting swords, a trait of rare slimes. Owners of such rare creatures generally hold high status and are acquainted with many influential people. Thinking about this, the protagonist subconsciously asked Maul if she had ever seen a mushy slime. Mal was surprised, but quickly explained that she had never encountered such a rare variety, which could fetch a hefty reward. This information unsettled the protagonist, as it reminded her of a similar disturbing presence she had felt before. By the next evening, although they had safely reached Oattown, the team leader informed the protagonist that the town and surrounding forests were still fraught with danger. The threat was not from monsters, but from a kidnapping criminal organization. Previous attempts to raid their hideout had failed, as the criminals had vacated the premises early. Frustrated, the captain emphasized that the protagonist was a prime target for them, so they would stay with her until the criminals were captured. However, the organization was highly secretive, and they had no leads. The protagonist mentioned a past incident where she was nearly attacked, which shocked everyone present. A team member then revealed a yellow round box that created a soundproof barrier, a valuable item. Before she met the eradication team, the protagonist had felt the same unsettling presence whenever monsters appeared nearby, but it always disappeared quickly. That night, she also felt it before going to sleep, but it vanished swiftly. Then Eric appeared outside her tent. The protagonist told the group she suspected Maul, based on information from Alan. Whenever something bad was about to happen, Alan would get agitated, which she guessed might be his ability. However, she couldn't disclose this openly, fearing it might lead to her being targeted. The next morning, she found the team members gathered to share some significant news within a soundproof barrier. They had secretly monitored Maul after suspecting her the previous night. They saw Maul and her siblings secretly talking with a traveling merchant using a soundproof barrier, pretending to have met him by chance. They claimed the merchant was just asking for directions, but the use of such a precious item for mere directions was suspicious. This raised doubts about the content of their conversation. Investigations revealed that neither Maul's team nor the traveling merchant had any significant transactions recorded in the town. It seemed like an undisclosed deal was taking place. The team thanked the protagonist for her suspicions, questioning whether mere speculation warranted an overnight investigation. The protagonist was puzzled. She had no evidence at all. Upon hearing this, a warm feeling washed over her, and tears welled up in her eyes. She was touched that they believed in her. At that moment, she made up her mind. She revealed to them that she was a monster tamer. The reason she suspected Alan was because of her tamed slime. She then took out a magical bag that she used to hide Alan and let him appear. Everyone was surprised to see a transparent slime, something they had never seen before. Soon after, the team leader and Eric took the protagonist to the Adventurers Guild. There, the guild's vice leader and the captain of the guards awaited her confirmation. Captain Rhoda presented a blue glass orb that the protagonist had obtained accidentally. He explained that it could identify whether the person speaking with the protagonist was good or bad, and it only had a week's effect. The team leader was intrigued and asked them to use it to help uncover a traitor within the organization. Captain Rhoda readily agreed, as that was their purpose for being there. The group quickly arrived at the residence formerly used by the kidnapping gang. The house was guarded by 2 team members, Zax on the right and Moon on the left. According to Alan's reaction, Zax was fine, but Alan bristled immediately upon hearing Moon's introduction. The protagonist could hardly believe they found a traitor so quickly. Without alarming the suspects, they intensified their efforts and screened all team members within a day. To their surprise, out of 157 people, 38 were traitors. At that moment, the Lord and the Count arrived, having heard of the significant actions taking place, and came to inquire about the progress. Alan bristled again. Although Lord David seemed aloof, Alan showed no reaction to him, indicating he was a good person. This meant the traitor must be the blonde Count. The captain of the guards found it hard to accept, as the Count was a hero in town. If he was indeed part of the organization, he was responsible for the murder of their infiltrated comrades. However, it wasn't the time for self-blame, as nobody knew about this at the start. The protagonist realized something. Everything they did today was conducted in secret. The team members who were investigated hadn't left the area, so the Count shouldn't have known about these matters. This meant there were spies not just within the guards, but also outside. They quickly went to the room guarded by Moon. Using a pretext, they sent him away and immediately started searching. However, they found nothing unexpected, just irrelevant items. The protagonist's past life reminded her of similar scenes in movies where there is usually a mechanism on the bookshelf. Although she didn't understand what movies meant, she followed the instructions from her past life. The next second, a hidden door opened before everyone. After a brief search, the group not only found countless illicit funds, but also discovered their transaction records, which could decisively prove their crimes. However, to avoid alarming the suspects, they restored the place to its original condition before leaving. The next day, the protagonist planned to wash her clothes during her break. Unexpectedly, Eric began to doubt her gender. "Sorry to have misled you," she said. "No need to apologize," Eric replied, suggesting it was better to keep it a secret, and he would pretend to be unaware. At that moment, Maul arrived, mentioning a nearby dessert shop she wanted to visit with the protagonist. Knowing Maul's intent, the protagonist was hesitant to refuse outright, as it might raise suspicion. Eric timely intervened, expressing his fondness for sweets and suggesting they visit a different shop instead. Despite knowing it was a trap, the protagonist agreed to go to the town's dessert shop with them to dismantle the trafficking gang. Though she was scared, she couldn't show it, as that would make the suspects wary. Alan, the slime in her arms, seemed to bristle, signaling her to leave quickly. Eric stepped forward, warning that he would not let anyone harm the protagonist. This didn't raise any suspicions among the group, as they had just been teasing her about Eric's 3-star flame skill. The atmosphere turned odd, but luckily, Maul tried to change the subject. However, Greenhair mocked her, calling her merely a 2-star beast tamer. This deeply hurt Maul's pride. At this point, the protagonist stood up for Maul. After all, aside from their differences, Maul was impressive in her eyes, especially since her slimes could even devour swords. Earlier in her journey, the protagonist often visited junkyards to pick up useful items, so she knew the value of things others deemed worthless. As evening approached, the protagonist and Eric safely left. It was clear Maul and her group had ulterior motives. If not for Eric's presence and their decision not to visit the initially mentioned dessert shop, they might have succeeded. Captain Rhoda was puzzled about why they had approached so openly, which implied they hadn't realized their exposure yet. If the protagonist had been taken, he couldn't avoid suspicion either. The protagonist speculated that perhaps this was a bait intentionally released by the organization behind the scenes to reveal the presence of traitors. Maul and her group were likely disposable pawns used by the organization in a conspicuous manner. Perhaps this was done to divert attention, facilitating the transport of funds from an already exposed base. This realization led them to decide to turn the tables on their scheme. Everyone was shocked when the protagonist suggested using herself as bait to capture the criminals. However, the plan was too bold and dangerous, and no one agreed initially. Finally, the team leader spoke out and rejected her idea, stating that they couldn't risk her safety, especially since they were unsure how many traitors were among them. The next day, the guild leader gathered all the adventurers together. He made everyone recognize the protagonist and ensured her safety, demonstrating to everyone inside and outside of Outlua Town that it was a safe place. The introductions were meant to be simple, but the first person who came up caused a problem. Alan, the protagonist's companion, bristled, indicating that this person was not trustworthy. The protagonist discreetly pulled Captain Rhoda aside. Although shocked, he quickly adjusted and let the next adventurer come forward. After the introductions, the protagonist was exhausted, but grateful to Alan for his help. Later, Maul approached the protagonist to congratulate her on becoming a celebrity and to thank her for resolving the previous situation. Eric then suggested revisiting the dessert shop that Maul had previously recommended to celebrate the protagonist's secured safety in town. The two brothers immediately agreed, but Maul seemed less cheerful than before and was lost in thought. Upon arriving, Maul enthusiastically introduced the dessert shop she had recommended and entered first with her brothers. However, when the shop owner appeared, Alan bristled again. The protagonist quietly alerted Eric, who then decided they had come with a purpose. He revealed that their visit to the dessert shop was part of a secret mission related to the future of the town. It turned out that the police and adventurers had formed a special task force for a mission in the forest, leaving the town vulnerable. To prevent a sudden attack by the trafficking gang, Eric hoped that the three would help guard the town. The dessert shop owner, overhearing this, discreetly added something from a small bottle into the desserts intended for the protagonist and Eric. He then served them, pretending to be unaware. However, Eric and the protagonist had already seen through his actions. When the owner left to signal his accomplices, Eric saw his chance and stopped pretending, directly confronting the three about their hidden identities and their assistance to the organization. Startled, the three were shocked, but Maul quickly responded, suggesting it was a misunderstanding. She proposed that if it was indeed a misunderstanding, they should prove their innocence by eating the desserts themselves. Knowing well what was in the desserts, the three realized there was no room for negotiation or reconciliation after their exposure. The two brothers immediately took a combative stance, intending to forcibly take down Eric. The redhead launched an attack right away. Within just a few breaths, they exchanged dozens of blows. Seeing this, the green-haired brother sneakily attacked Eric. While Eric was gaining the upper hand, the protagonist was pleased. However, the brothers planned to attack Eric together next, with Maul providing support from a distance. Eric knew he could not win under these circumstances. Unexpectedly, Maul, who was supposed to be their ally, turned her attacks on them instead. Caught off guard, they all fell victim to her assault. Surprised, Eric quickly stepped forward and knocked them down decisively. Meanwhile, the organization received false information and immediately sent people to attack the original stronghold. The police force members tried to stop them but could not withstand the undercover agents colluding from within. They could only watch helplessly as the attackers entered. Unbeknownst to them, this was all a trap set for the trafficking organization. The people staying behind were unaware of the underlying plan, which was meant to lure all the traffickers in and attack them indiscriminately with sleeping gas grenades. This would allow their capture without injury and prevent any escapes. Eric had indeed organized a special task force, but their mission was to clear out undercover agents within the police and among the adventurers. Of course, the undercover agents might have tried to eliminate them first, to later operate in town more recklessly, but the police chief, who had planned everything, anticipated this. The moment they acted, he pulled out a pre-prepared magical weapon and fired a net that was difficult to escape and block their magic. The two captains at the rear, upon receiving the signal, did not hesitate and struck hard at the traitors already identified within the team. The operation proceeded smoothly and swiftly, with all suspects arrested. Although some tried to argue, they were mostly accomplices and could not find a reason to refute. Meanwhile, Deputy Chief Bob enjoyed administering electric shocks to those caught in the net as part of the plan. All suspects were arrested, including a high-ranking count in the town. This success was due to the protagonist's intelligence and everyone's cooperation. Alan was credited as the main contributor. That evening, to ensure no remnants of corruption remained, the captain gathered all remaining suspects. Remember the protagonist's greedy nature? As a reward for her help in dismantling the major trafficking ring, the town prepared 150 radars as a token of gratitude. This excited the protagonist, who, despite being wealthy, had not forgotten her roots and still made time for hunting Jerry. Unfortunately, recent hunting had been poor, and she caught none. Just then, a black cat emerged from the forest. Seeing the cat, the protagonist's mood immediately lifted. However, noticing her empty traps, the cat turned and left without a word. Just as the protagonist was puzzled, she heard the authoritative roar of a small black animal. Subsequently, numerous small animals began fleeing towards her direction. Without exception, all were captured by the protagonist. When she returned to town, she was surprised to find a celebration held in her honor, celebrating the successful dismantling of the trafficking ring. As the beloved hero and key contributor, she was warmly welcomed and fed by everyone. During the celebration, the captain spoke to the protagonist about the captured individuals. The Count, faced with irrefutable evidence, decided to expose all his contacts, including numerous nobles from the capital and members of underground organizations, causing a widespread stir. The protagonist was worried about Maul's fate. However, the guild president reassured her, explaining that Maul was a low-level member of the organization and knew nothing significant. Since she had betrayed the organization at a critical moment, she could be treated leniently. Hearing this, the protagonist was relieved. More than that, the guild president expressed a hope that the protagonist would settle down there. This was their wish. Looking at the familiar faces around her, the protagonist recalled the words of a fortune teller. One does not have to move to the town next to the capital. One can settle down wherever feels right, and when trusted individuals are met, there is no need to hide one's own story. With this in mind, the protagonist decided to open up about her past. She revealed that she was diagnosed as a starless beast tamer at the age of 5, considered abandoned by the gods according to her father. Her once happy life shattered then. Fortunately, a fortune teller accepted her and taught her much. However, her peace was short-lived. At 8 years old, the village chief claimed that being starless would bring calamity to the village and incited the villagers to kill her. Heartbroken and unwilling, she had no choice but to flee. Listening to everyone's caring words, the protagonist felt an unprecedented sense of happiness envelop her. After composing herself, she declared that she could now embark on her journey with peace of mind. Everyone present was surprised. Did she not wish to stay? The protagonist explained that she initially started her journey to escape, fearful of being discovered as starless and losing her life. She first met Captain Jones and Deputy Captain Velabella of Latome Village, who likely knew her secret early on but never pressed her. Instead, they always helped her. Now, having been targeted by an organization and seeing everyone's willingness to help and even adopt her reckless plan, she felt reassured. Everyone was relieved to hear this.